Moving to Live is a podcast about movement and exercise. Along with our sister podcast, FitLab PGH, we have the ethos that movement is a lifestyle, not just an activity, because movement is part of what makes your life complete. Moving to Live interviews professionals in the movement field who have a variety of experiences, education, and professional titles. At the end of the day, we all want to move more, and we want our patients, athletes, or clients to move more or move better, more efficiently, or move with less pain. Some of the people we interview you will have heard of. They're well known in and outside of the movement and exercise professions. Others you may not have heard of, but they have a great deal of knowledge to share. Many people doing the best work spend their time working with people, not working on their social media presence. Each Moving to Live interview will be long enough to impart usable information, but short enough to be able to be consumed in a single listen, during your workout, commute, or even during dinner prep. Before we get to the interview, a quick request. If you like what you hear, please leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, and share the podcast with your friends or anyone who understands that movement is a lifestyle. We appreciate it, and our guests appreciate it too. Welcome back to another edition of Moving to Live, where our ethos, along with our sister podcast, is movement is a lifestyle, not just an activity. For those of you who've listened to Moving to Live before, you know we try to interview movement professionals. I can say today, literally across the world, where it's like a 12 or 13 hour time difference with today's guest. We want to find out their story. How did they get to where they are, and what do they do? Because very often in this field, there is that area of silo knowledge where people only talk to other people who either make them feel comfortable or who are in their expertise. Because at the end of the day, you never know who you can learn from. And by learning from people who are in the same type of field, but maybe slightly different, you can learn a lot. I'm not sure how I connected with tonight's guest. I know that I had the opportunity to be on his podcast. Great time. I am talking tonight with Matty Lansdown. He is from Australia, and his podcast is How to Not Get Sick and Die, which I think in the middle of, at least in the United States, COVID and people not sure what's going on with cold and flu season, that's really appropriate topic. So Matty, thanks for taking time to talk to Moving to Live.
Hey, Ben, how you doing? Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to chat.
We try to do audiograms when we start promoting the podcast. And one of the things I found that I do just innately is my first question I always ask podcasters is, you're stuck in an elevator, you're standing in line at a coffee shop, and you've got a t-shirt on or something on, and somebody says, you know, what do you do? What's your 30-second spiel? This is Matty Lansdown, and this is what I do.
Well, as a fellow podcaster, you'd understand that nailing a 30-second monologue is a small time frame for me. But basically, I help people lose weight, clear their brain fog, and get more energy. And in the process of that, often help people with their gut health, and eventually, as we were talking about before, move their digestion better and move their body better, so they can spend time doing what they want to do rather than just, suffering in pain and not being able to eat the things they want to eat and just, living in a slumber.
And I know I'd be remiss not to ask this. You're in Australia, I'm in the United States. It seems every guest that I interview from either Europe or Australia or New Zealand, they talk about Americans, and they talk about the amount of food that we have in our food servings, and it just blows their mind. Have you had the opportunity to travel to America or talk to friends who have, and have you found the same thing, or have they found the same thing?
Yeah, I've been to America a few times now, and I remember the first time I ever got off at LAX airport in Los Angeles, and the first thing I noticed was that instantly the air smelt deep fried. And I was like, firstly, that is what I expected, but also confronting. And yeah, then meal sizes. So I was sort of, old enough to be on my health journey and a health professional at that point. So I was like, I'm gonna do this for the experience once or twice, but beyond that, I'm gonna find just an equally sized salad. But yeah, I did find the meal servings to be absolutely monstrous, which kind of goes hand in hand with what the rest of the world perceives Americans to be in every way, which is just big, bold, and just full on.
And here in America, I'll probably insult some people with this. Here in America, that's the way we think Texans are. So,
yeah, right.
Each group of people has that. I know a number of Texans that I'm very fond of. So I one of the things that I really love about doing with Moving to Live is obviously learning more about what people do professionally, but how they started out. And I know from being on your podcast and our chatting before and after, you were one of those people who you started out, you were active as a kid and you were pretty much, or were, an elite athlete at some point.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about your journey there, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I guess, so I'm in Melbourne, so it's one of Australia's major cities, but I didn't grow up in the city. I grew up in the countryside, in a typical Aussie country family, and spent most of my youth on my bicycle, bouncing between my friends' houses and the local bush. Like, there's obviously lots of bushland in Australia, and the bush was just sort of a couple of houses away. And I spent a lot of my teenage years and youth, in the ponds, yabbying, running around building cubby houses in the tree plantations for the paper mill, where my dad worked. And so, like, that was just life. Like, life was on the bike, and mum and dad were very much, get outside kind of people. I wasn't allowed to watch very much TV growing up, which I, at the time, totally despised my parents for. But because, I'd get to school and everybody would be chatting about whatever show they'd been watching, and I felt super uncool. But I was always active, fortunately, because of my parents, and we lived on a fairly big property as well. When I was younger, so just lots of space to move, and it was a very, very active family in the sense that not sport, but per se, but like everybody would get in on renovating the house or digging out the backyard to, which it was a couple of year project in order to put the back porch on, and we moved tons of dirt, and it was just, if it needed doing, you just did it kind of mentality, which I'm really grateful for my parents gifting to me, that kind of approach to life, do it yourself type thing. And from there, like, I got into sport at a really young age. So I started off, I think baseball was the first sport that I played, which in Australia is very rare. It's a very, very small field of sport in Australia. And to the point, actually, a few years ago, they did the opening of the World Championships in Sydney. And I forget who it was between, but my parents, we all went up there because we spent so many years in the baseball industry in Australia, and they had Australia's best players play against the best players from America. And the dollar value was that it was about $250,000 worth of Australian players playing against $250 million worth of players, same number of players. So, baseball's not big in Australia, but I played baseball for about 9 years, and my dad ended up being the secretary of the baseball club, and he ended up started playing baseball as well. And I got to state level for that, which obviously in Australia is not super impressive, but that's where I began. And then from there, I sort of moved across to swimming. And that was just kind of a natural evolution because, in Australia, it's a very much a beach lifestyle kind of thing. Not that I grew up near a beach, but it was just everybody just learns to swim at a super young age. And then you spend the summer at the beach, right? So the natural progression, then I just finished swim lessons at like 9 or 10 and then moved into swimming club. And from there, I sort of progressed from, training 2 or 3 times a week, which again, for me, was just a social event. Like, I was just like, get to hang out with a heap of cool people and we just swim up and down. Like, and then, on some weekends we go and do competitions, and I just loved it because there's just people everywhere. And then I eventually started to sort of mature into my, adolescent body and get a bit of muscle, and I started doing all right at swimming, and I started progressing then to 4 or 5 times a week, to 7 times a week training, to 10, and I think at my peak it was sort of 12 to 14 times a week training for swimming, and doing states, world championships, national swimming, all of these kinds of events. It was full on, like, it was crazy. And I was still a teenager at this, and I've got my coach in my ear right now who was always saying, Matthew, get off the end of the lane and stop talking. Like, it was just always a big social event for me. Like, I just loved it. And I probably could have done better if I was less interested in, chatting to the girls in the lane next door. But yeah, I got to a fairly decent level without really meaning to, which might sound a little ostentatious, but I was just enthusiastic rather than, super, super hardcore about it. And when I guess being raised with my parents being like, if something needs to be done, do it. I sort of just naturally, it didn't seem like work to be like, oh, well, I don't feel tired, I could swim, so do it. Like, so that was the approach I took. And then, I sort of got to the point where it was a decision between, do I aim for, Worlds and Olympics and Commonwealth Games, or do I focus on my high school education? And because I wasn't super hardcore, I ended up going with the high school education, which I don't know if I regret. But yeah, I spent a lot of my teenage years drenched in chlorine, going back and forward, doing 5, 10, 20 Ks a week.
I'm curious because I've known a lot of fairly good swimmers, a few Olympians. Very few of them still swim. As somebody who swam as many as 14 times a week, do you still swim? And I don't mean going to the beach and paddling out of the surf, but actually swim for fitness or swim for competition in masters.
Well, one of the things that's good about spending that long as a teenager swimming, and fortunately my metabolism stayed with me. And what I mean by that is that once the group of people that I went through, swimming with stopped, a lot of people are that intense with their sport, they blow out, like they gain 10, 20, 30, 40 kilograms. And I was very fortunate. My metabolism stayed with the lifestyle that I progressed into. And so I'm very lucky to say that most days of the week, I can jump in a pool and do the national time for like sort of the 100-meter freestyle, 100-meter backstroke. I'm very lucky. And then I can't swim for like a week after that. But but every year when there's usually world championships are on or something like that, or qualifying, and there might be someone that I still know around, I'm like, all right, actually, you know what? I can get back into this. I can do this, and I'm motivated, and I'll go down and I'll swim, and then I'll not be able to walk for 2 days.
It sounds like your decision to go or to concentrate in the high school, as opposed to saying, okay, I'm going to see, can I make it to the Commonwealth Games, to the Olympics? It sounds like that was, along with your swimming career, was a healthy type of thing, that your parents didn't say, Matthew, you have to do this. It was just kind of organically developed, and kind of your decision along those same lines was kind of like, well, I could do this or I can do that, as opposed to having it, for lack of a better term, ripped from you because all of a sudden you realized, oh, I'm not good enough to go to the next level. Everything I've worked for is done. And it seems that shows through in the way you tell the story.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually, when you just sort of talking about that there, it reminded me of being like, I've got these memories, these flashbacks to when we're poolside, you know, the whole team's set up. We've got the marquee set up where everybody sits under, and swim meets are like all day, all weekend, half week, full week events. Like, they're huge. And I remember so many times being at country championships or national championships or state championships, and I'd finish my race and I might have got 4th or 5th or 6th or whatever. I'd be a bit down for about half an hour. I'd be like, oh, I should have put more effort in. And then I distinctly remember the other, boys my age, or teenage boys my age, crying, being scolded by their parents. Like, they could have got bronze medal, and, their parents were just yelling and screaming, like, no shame, like just hammering them. So I'm so grateful. I remember thinking, like, what is going on over there? For me, it was just all a big bit of fun, it was social, and there was all these people around all the time, and it was, in the relays, I used to love the relays, of course, because I'm super social, and I was a part of a few relay teams that did exceptionally well at country championships and stuff, so, it's always good, but it shocked me as a teenager, and I realized that a lot of people, a lot of these swimmers and elite athletes and people that are prodigies, in any field, are often victim to these savage parents and these horrible home environments that are just ruthless, And so I'm very grateful that my parents were not like that.
So you finish the swimming career, you go on to high school, you go to university. How do you get into what you're doing now? In addition to podcasting, you gave a really nice, and you did a better job than me of holding it to around 30 seconds. How do you go from, and I'm saying this again jokingly, ex-swimmer to somebody who's helping people who, from talking to you, I know, you think very similarly to me in the fact that you don't necessarily have to be an athlete to move, to have a quality of life, to, have a positive outlook and to be healthy, even though we're kind of taught in first world society. It's like, well, you're getting older. You can't expect that. You can't expect to feel the way that you felt when you were 20. So how did that transition out? I don't know exactly how high school to college works in Australia. I know you have a different PhD program than we have here in the US, where you're predominantly research, but how does it work from high school to college as far as the path that you took to get where you are now?
Yeah, so I guess, as I said before, I grew up in a small town, and apart from the movement career, I also had another movement career that I was super passionate about, which I've been a session musician as a drummer for like 17 years now. And so I realized when I had that question in front of me, education or sport, and I chose the education, not passionately, by the way. I was just like, oh, I guess I'll do that, sort of thing. But I realized in that moment, I've been playing drums for a couple of years, and I realized, oh, music is something that I can get better at forever. And I realized sport, my peak was in the next 2 years if I was to seriously have a crack at it. And then I'd just be miserable forever because I could never get back to being 22-year-old me. And then I just had this epiphany. And so from there, I applied for university. So finishing high school, and I applied for music and a bunch of other degrees just because I had to. I was just like, I don't know if uni's for me. I'll see what happens. And I applied for all of these different degrees, and I got into music, and I got into forensic science and a number of science degrees. And I was like, oh, wow, I didn't expect this. And so growing up in a small family in a small town, not really knowing any musicians, I was kind of like, why would I go to university to study drumming? I can just do drumming anyway. And I just had no sort of information about why I would do that. So I chose the science because it sounded interesting, and I could still do music, which was amazing. So my drums have been carted everywhere with me through my life, and I've been lucky to do lots of amazing things with music as well. Big gigs, small gigs, different countries, etc. But I moved away from home to go to university to study science, and from there I just started getting interested in the world, because one of the interesting things where the movement comes into it is, as I'm learning science and sort of I ended up becoming a molecular biologist, was that at this time I'm living with the strength and conditioning coaches of the Geelong Cats. Now the Geelong Cats in Australia are virtually one of the most elite AFL, Australian Football League teams in the country, and so as I was doing uni, I was living with the strength and conditioning coaches, and I realized when I first moved in with these guys, they're a few years older than me, so they were the perfect sort of role models. I was in uni, they were sort of 5 or 6 years post uni, and they were just that little bit ahead, that they really just led the way and showed the way in a really fun kind of way. And we would have elite athletes at our house every single day: basketballers, Olympics, swimmers, sprinters, marathon runners. All because they ran a gym out of our house as well, and I just became a part of this life. It was very masculine, competitive, but it was more as well. It was kind of overall just like you come to this house just to work out, and everybody has fun just working out, whatever your ability is, and everybody naturally just gets stronger. And so it was at this point that I realized my university diet, which was really not good because it was very cheap, and it was all of the horrible things, that people put into their bodies at uni, which is, beer, pasta, rice, and bread, all the white stuff. And I would spend as little as I could on that to save more for the beer. And then I moved in with the strength and conditioning coaches, and I was like, wow, these guys are literally photoshopped every day. Their bodies are amazing. They're able to achieve all sorts of amazing things just as they're normal. That's just their baseline. And I started realizing that nutrition really, really impacted the body. And I guess I was raised in a typical way. And even in my science degree, they don't talk about, and I did a lot of medical lectures and medical subjects, and in none of those subjects do they ever talk about the impact of food on the body, ever. And since then, I've obviously worked in a hospital for the better part of 10 years and in chronic disease research, and still they don't talk about food. But it was in this house at uni that I realized food is so impactful on the body, and that's because every time that they wanted a different outcome out of their body, or one of the athletes that would come over, or the team was going through a different strength phase, they would change the diet first. That would be the go-to. The gym routine would change as well, but that would be second. And then I was lucky enough to go along to supplement lectures at the club, at the Geelong Cats Footy Club, and then all of these different education things. And I really started being like, oh my God, food is like everything. And so I went on to do my honors in nutritional epigenetics, which is sort of how nutrition affects the way that DNA switches on and off, and affects our metabolism. And so that kind of led me down a path. And then I've worked in hospital in chronic disease, which was an unexpected job, working in a part of a cancer research team. And it was here that I really got fired up, because I sort of walked in with no real ego, kind of how I went about swimming, just like, I'm just here to see what happens, and I started getting really passionate about it, because I started realizing that, remembering my foundations of like food changes the body, and then looking on the World Health Organization website, where they list in the top 3 causes of cancer is diet and lifestyle, and being in a cancer hospital and like, no one's talking about diet and lifestyle. These are the 2 biggest causes. And then I started just observing what was happening sort of in more detail. And it was like, the door at the front is just a rotating door. You're like, once you come in, you go out, you come in, you go out. And I realized that the problem causing cancer and diabetes and Alzheimer's and pick your chronic disease happens outside the hospital. And if we're not fixing the bit that's outside the hospital, then of course they're going to come back. Of course everybody relapses, because they haven't fixed the cause. And then I had this epiphany that, doctors don't get nutrition education, despite the fact that all of society is meant to look at medical doctors as masters of biology. What's one thing we do every single day? In America, up to 11 times a day, we put food into our biology. Doctors don't know anything about food. And to me, that's like a mechanic saying, well, we've got petrol and we've got water, and they both seem to be a liquid. They both should run the car, right? Or, and that's the way I see it. And especially when what people in hospital get fed, you're like, clearly they don't think the fuel source is appropriate or relevant, rather. And so this just got me super fired up. Like, that I was like, we know, like the World Health Organization knows that diet and lifestyle causes disease, all the major chronic diseases, and we're doing nothing about it. And so this led me down the path of doing my own research into alternative medicine, medical modalities, and all of these other things. But it came from the foundation of knowing that my housemates, when they wanted something more from their body or to change an outcome, they changed the diet. And that's where it really began. And it just blew my mind. And then I became a nutritional therapist, and now sort of work with Melbourne Functional Medicine, helping people, again, with the cause of their problems. And it's often on their plate, which, as we were talking about before we sort of hit record, all ends up with them wanting to move more in their life, to experience their life, so that they can, not be sitting at home suffering all of the time. So it's kind of there's a few roundabouts in that story, but that's essentially how I got from swimmer all the way to where I'm at now.
We're talking with Matty Lansdown from Australia. I think it's interesting that you use the mechanics analogy with petrol, because one of the things I've said to my dad numerous times, that hopefully he's getting the idea more, is people spend more time looking for a mechanic for their car than they do looking for a physician. And I mean, I know one of the messages my parents gave me when I first started interviewing for jobs, way back when I was in high school, is, look, when you go for a job interview, it's not just them interviewing you, it's you interviewing them to see if you want to work for them. And
absolutely,
I look at it the same way with physicians. I mean, you are, and this is no knock on physician friends of mine, because to some extent they're constrained by the medical system, but there are some good gems out there, but you can't just, run your finger down the Google search engine and say, oh, this will be a good one. And it's actually, when you said that, one of the things that I did, or one of the positive things that's come from this pandemic, as I was thinking of doing it, is I have a physician that I pay for out of pocket for a general practice physician. He doesn't want to call it a concierge because it's much more approachable, but you pay a specific fee to be able to see him. And I remember when I first heard about it, I knew about it. I knew about that medical model, and I scheduled an appointment just to go in and talk to him, because I wanted to make sure that it was a good fit. And it really, it's been about 8 months, and it's phenomenal. And I think it's interesting that what I see, or what friends of mine see in the United States as being a problem, is a problem not only here, but also literally all the way around the world.
Yeah, and as you said, they're often constrained. There's lots of great I've never worked with a bad doctor. Like, I spent a long time in hospitals, and I've never met a bad doctor that had any ill intent. They're all part of the system that was created well before we were all born. And there's rules and regulations, and I know people that have been fined like big numbers of for doing things that are outside their scope, which is finding a symptom and giving a drug. And if you help someone with their nutrition to lose weight or get off insulin medication, you're instantly, as a doctor, outside your scope, and you can be fined for stuff like that. And so, yeah, I think that's really important to say that I've never met an ill-intended doctor ever. They're all just victims to the framework in which they work.
I know there's a growing number here in the United States who are going outside the system and doing cash-based so they can integrate other things into it. I'm curious with when you first started recognizing this when working in chronic disease, how did you seek out functional medicine physicians? I mean, were you aware of that before, or were you talking to somebody in the lab and they said, hey, this is another way of approaching these problems with a physician who's using his knowledge or her knowledge in a slightly different way than you would traditionally see?
I started just on YouTube. So if we go back 10 years, 10 years ago, me would be looking at me now and being like, Matty, you are a crazy hippie. Like, I was a hardcore Western medical scientist. Mum was a nurse. I used to go to the hospital with mum as daycare when I was a child. So I was indoctrinated as a young age that Western medicine and allopathic treatments were the holy grail and anything else was woo-woo nonsense. And so it took me a lot of my own homework about just learning about the structure of Western medicine, where it came from, how it was founded, what the principles it was founded on, what happened in that process, and then to look into other medical modalities and be like, okay, let's just see what else is out there. If I've just had this epiphany that I'm looking at the world one way. Like, I'm a part of this group of people in society, which is most, and I'm looking at the whole, body in one way, which is this way. And so I was like, all right, let's look at some other opinions. And I found traditional Chinese medicine, which has approximately 10,000 years of practice and experience. And there's plenty of Chinese people in the world. Like, it clearly, isn't the worst thing. And then I looked into Ayurveda. Indian medicine, another country that's populated with over 1 billion people, and they still use it today, which is, again, it's a holistic approach. It factors in your emotions, it factors in relationships, the meals you're eating. The mantra of Ayurveda is often meals as medicine, right? So, because they know intimately, and Ayurveda is about 6,500 years old. And so I just started looking into all these other medical modalities that had far more, history and practice than we do with Western medicine, which is not to say Western medicine isn't amazing and doesn't have its place. It absolutely does in emergency acute medicine and helps a very, very small percentage of chronic disease sufferers. But these other modalities that had been in very many places literally outlawed because they were a competing business. Like, literally, they were like, no, we're going to outlaw that. We're going to make it illegal. You're not allowed to do X, Y, Z. And so it was through this research phase that I went sort of outside of my own scope, let's say, as a science researcher, as a disease researcher. I started learning about all these other things. Then I started realizing that people were integrating these types of practices from Chinese medicine, from African heritage, from Egyptian medicine, Babylonian, all this kind of stuff. They were integrating it into Western medicine and calling it functional medicine because it was about the functions that we do every single day. And then from there, I started getting familiar with the term functional medicine and naturopathy, which pulls on all of these different sort of natural healing modalities as well as modern science. And that's where the magic really happens, is using modern science and supplementation along with all of these traditional health values and ways of looking at the body. And there's for everybody, they fall somewhere different on the spectrum, but there's a nice junction between conventional medicine and alternative integrative medicine as well. So I just did this long, drawn-out research process of primarily convincing myself. The other important detail in that story is that is Emily. So Emily's been my partner for most of my adult life, and she actually is a clinical nurse specialist at the Royal Women's Hospital here in Melbourne, and so our hospitals are pretty much next door to each other. And she herself actually had 2 to 3, 3 in the beginning, incurable diseases. So as I was going on this journey sort of in my own world and just being like, patients are not getting better, like they come here to die essentially, she was in a situation where with her health, and had been many, many years before I met her, where the more drugs she was given, the worse the problem got. And she ended up eliminating one of those diseases and massively reducing the impact of the other two after going on a very long journey through alternative medical practitioners, detoxing from all of the drugs she'd been on for a long time, and now doesn't take any pharmaceuticals. Her health is the best it's ever been. You would never be able to tell that there's ever been a single problem in her life health-wise. And so these two journeys were happening concurrently. So I was watching somebody I loved go through this and, having to find the courage to sort of stand up and say, I'm not going to do this anymore to doctors and surgeons that all, thought she was an idiot. And she, like me, we also were working in the Western medical model. So it was really confusing. So together we did so much research, and now our lives are just, full of all of this different research that's just not presented to people. And again, that's outside the doctor's scope. And so now, as you mentioned, functional medicine, it's kind of everywhere now, which is great. People are getting additional qualifications. And so, I think the future's looking good because people are starting to incorporate all of these different things. But that was the kind of journey that I was sort of watched Emily at the same time as watching the patients on the clinical trials that I was a part of, and just like, there's got to be a better answer. So
I have to ask, you mentioned a little bit earlier that your mom's a nurse. What has her thought process, or what has she shared with you as you've gone down this journey? Since it's a different way of looking at things, and I think what you have put together, whether you've realized it or not, is a health model where you basically have a toolbox, and all of these different things are tools. And I think the key thing that, whether you realize it or not, you've done is you've been very proactive rather than just sitting back and saying, oh, well, you're the expert. Tell me what I'm supposed to do. You've been, which I want to get into more. But first, I want to find out what's your mom's attitude been towards this?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I didn't realize until I went on this journey, or maybe I realized about 5 years ago now, but that when I was younger, my mum actually took my sister and I, when we had some problems, we would go to the doctor, but she also used to take us to chiropractors. She also used to take us to naturopaths. And I just had blanked that out of my mind totally. Like, after we started swimming, my sister swam as well. Like, the chlorine caused some kind of weird all over body rash, and no one could figure it out. All these creams and different things, and ended up being with a chiropractor who put us on a dairy-free, gluten or grain-free diet and sugar-free, and that literally made it go away forever. Like, it never came back. And then I just had this epiphany a while ago, and I was like, oh my God, she treated us that way, and now I treat people using similar types of things. And when I was actually born, I was born with an all-over body severe eczema, I obviously don't remember this, but mum tried steroid creams, and the doctors tried all sorts of injections and different things, and nothing worked. But mum, a couple of years before I was born, had actually done an aromatherapy course with essential oils. And so she made up some concoction at home, which the base oil was almond oil, and she lathered me up every day for however long, and it disappeared and never came back ever. And all the steroid creams that they were trying to use, nothing worked. So it was just interesting that mum, for a few years there, I mirrored my mum in the sense that I was working in an establishment that I was not utilizing as my own solution. She took us to these alternative practitioners that solved our problems, despite going to work every day, offering people the alternative that she may or may not believe in. But, she works in a clinic now. But yeah, so my mum is very, kind of exposed me to it without me kind of realizing in the beginning.
And when you're telling this story about your mom, I'm reminded a few minutes ago when we were recording, you said you were kind of a hippie. You maybe grew up with a hippie for a mother. And I'm saying this in a positive way because she was willing to say, okay, maybe this doesn't work. Let's try something else, which I think many parents would go, oh my God, the doctor said we need to put this steroid cream on. I can't ask him, why are we doing this, or how long are we doing this, because he or she is the doctor and they're the expert. And I think one of the things I found with the couple of functional medicine physicians that I've talked to, and the people who maybe are slightly outside the norm in the medical field, is the best ones are the ones who have the trait of, number one, you can ask them a question and they're not threatened by it. And number two, I may have told this story when I was interviewed on your podcast, but I've had a number of retinal problems due to structural problems. And I still remember my retinal surgeon saying, we need to do this procedure in the office today. Let me see if my colleague's here, because I can do it, but he can do it even better. And I think one of the things that I've seen with functional medicine physicians who've gone that path is they looked at the traditional model and they said, this isn't working for enough of my patients. What can I do differently? When you get clients or patients, I'm not sure what you call them because I know it's different in each country as far as what you can call them legally. But when you get them, I guess my first question is, do they find you as, oh, this is somebody who can help me? Or do they kind of come in more often skeptical? It's like, well, nothing else has worked. I'll give this woo-woo stuff a check out.
I would say most people have gone that path, which is that, yeah, what they know to be true, and we all behave from our belief systems, right? And our belief systems are often given to us by our parents or our parental figures when we're younger, and so we hold these beliefs throughout all of our lives, and we get to a point eventually, especially people in their midlife or later life, where it's like, I've been trying to solve this problem for so long, maybe my belief about how it should be solved is the problem. Like, maybe I should actually branch out and try this other ridiculous nonsense that Matty keeps talking about, or whoever, and a lot of people, they're out of solutions. Like, a lot of people reach me by the time they're on their fourth relapse, and they're like, and often they reach me too late because it took too many attempts at their first belief system, and their body's depleted, their immune system's knackered, and they're like, oh, they're finally ready to talk to my friend Matty, who talks about things a little differently, kind of thing. So, a lot of people sort of come from that standpoint. However, I find that by the time they're there, by the time they're knocking on the door, they're ready. They're ready to try. Like, they're like, you know what? That didn't work. I want something to work. Let's go. Like, I think there's definitely a demographic of people that don't want to get better. I believe it's a small demographic, but a lot of people are and Western medicine facilitates a victim mindset, which is, something that sort of drives me a bit crazy because, and I think we spoke about this before we jumped on and hit record, was that, something that lacks when you see a doctor is the behavioral component and the emotional component. And there's very few people that don't want to get well, that don't want to lose, I guess most of your listeners are American, right? 100 pounds or 50 pounds or, whatever it is for them. There's very few people that don't want that to happen. And weight loss for the most part is a very easy equation, but it's why don't people do it? And it comes down to their beliefs and their behaviors, and you got to be able to work with that and support that. And I think that's the bit that's missing for a lot of people, is that they don't have the emotional support to be able to navigate these essentially personality changes, because you're about to behave in a different way and be unrecognizable to yourself. And so I think that, a lot of people, by the time they reach me, are like, they're ready to go, but they're open to change. But I think that the bit that's important that I like to offer people is like sort of that health coaching component, which is we're going to work through and navigate these behavior changes, personality changes, and then the outcome is that the weight will disappear, and then the outcome is that you'll start eating different foods and your gut will fix itself, or whatever thing it is, rather than just here's the pills, here's the supplements. Go and take them and then beat them up next time they come back because they didn't take them all of the days, So, I think there's definitely people that are raised in families, though, that are open to, alternative medicine as well, that are sort of, they just start there. They would just never walk into a hospital. So there's all types of people, but I just try and make it just like my approach to my swimming career and going to uni, like, that's like the name of the podcast, How to Not Get Sick and Die. I want people to not come into this process like it's so heavy and scary, and, we're having fun. We're making your body work better. This is awesome. This is great, So just like movement, like you want to do it in a way that's fun for you. We don't want to make this even more painful. So I really want to like to help people take that approach, because I think that taking that energy, not to get too woo-woo, but taking that vibe towards your treatment or your healing or your recovery is so much better than being like, oh, I've got to go to the gym. I hate going to the gym, or I've got to go and see my doctor. He's going to tell me how shit I've been, So I think that's really important.
I know one of the things that's come through as I've talked to you is when you think of the term health coach, you commonly think scam, social media. And I'm generalizing and I'm kind of caricaturizing, and you're laughing. I think you know where I'm going with this.
100%.
Because, I will be the first to admit, if I want a good laugh, I'll open up Instagram and just start scrolling down things, because there is so much misinformation, and it's done a disservice, because I think you've hit on the fact. It's like, okay, you can see 50 people a day and you can say you need to do A, B, C, or D, but 49 of them that'll work for, maybe. That 50th person, they need that little tweak, or they need to go, okay, right now, this isn't the right situation. We need to get your husband or your wife or something in there. How do you, when you've got friends who maybe you're not able to work with, or people who contact you from other countries, how do you give them, or what's the advice or information? How do you find somebody who isn't one of those kind of way off in left field? If you're not doing it my way, you're an idiot. Because clearly from what you're saying, this is not the path that you've decided to go down.
I think it's interesting you mentioned the health coach thing. So there's a lack of, but a really important distinction to make when it comes to health coaching. And that is that coaches support. Like, the coach helps you find the solution. And a lot of health coaches on Instagram, and I do the same thing. Like, there's so many health coaches on there that are they're literally just talking shit. Like, they haven't been to uni, and you don't have to go to uni, that's not the be all and end all, but they haven't been through some kind of mentorship program, or, they haven't sat on PubMed, as long as a lot of people have, kind of thing, and looked at real information, and I think coaches, they step out of their boundaries and their scope every single day. Like, their coaches are meant to be there for support and guidance, not training, education, and instruction. It's a really important distinction. And if you have a coach that's becoming the consultant, you need to find an actual consultant, right? And those two should pair together. It would kind of be like a doctor pairing with a psychologist, right? It's like, so it's like the person that's telling you what to do, and then the coach is the person that supports the behavior change. So yeah, I think coaches every single day try and be consultants, or try and be naturopaths, or try and be doctors. And unfortunately, that's why they get it wrong so many times, because they're not. And some of them are, highly educated for whatever reason, and have been to uni and stuff like that. But yeah, I think, deciphering, and again, like you said, have an interview with your doctor. If you want a health coach because you want support with your behavior change, interview them. Are they actually just going to tell you what to eat? Because that's not a coach. That's not what a coach is. Like, a coach is going to guide you on the path to successful behavior and belief change, right? Which is a very different kettle of fish. And in my experience, like, I'm a scientist, but arguably I bounce between the scientist and educator and the coach, because a lot of people know. I've never spoken to a room full of people that didn't know vegetables were probably a good idea, Like, they know. It's not about more education. It's about the coaching component. But again, the coaching component is not the education. So I think for everybody listening that, if you ever do come to a situation where you need a health coach, or you need a coach involved in your health plan, you really need to make sure they know what they're doing, and they know where their scope starts and ends, type thing, so that it doesn't just turn into a laughing stock, and your health is sent in the wrong direction, which is absolutely not what you want.
I think the one thing to add to that you didn't say, but maybe you were being polite, is the good coaches are the ones who don't have an ego. They're the ones who say, geez, I don't know about that. We need to refer you to somebody else. And I think for anybody who wants to get better, or wants to have good health, when they've got a so-called expert, or somebody who is an expert in a particular thing, who says, I don't know, let's find somebody who knows more. That goes more than them saying, well, I can help you with that because, I saw something. And I think that's important to emphasize also.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's one benefit and maybe you find this too. But for me, having a podcast, like, I meet and have so many amazing conversations with people all over the place, that I get on the phone with someone that's inquiring about fixing something, or they want to avoid surgery. And I can say I'm not the best person for that, but I have like 3 or 4 people that I'm going to message them and just check that they're the right person. And I think, that networking component. And I find on the sort of more alternative, natural, the health side, there's everybody's so interested in collaboration, and that's just, maybe it's just the community that I'm in. I'm sure there's egos here too, no doubt. But when it comes to Western medicine, it's like, that guy, or the people that I know are like, I can fix anything. Whereas over here, everyone's like, that's not my specialty, but go see Matty. Or I'll be like, that's not my specialty. I'll introduce you in an email to Ben, And I think that approach is ego is the perfect word. There's just less ego and more people focused on patient outcomes rather than revenue.
I think one of the things you hit on, and I mentioned a few minutes ago that I wanted to come back on, is it's very clear in your journey and your significant other's journey that you were proactive. And I think you built on this when you talked about, and you gave a definition, what a good definition of a health coach is you're not there to tell them what to do. You're there to encourage them, to help them identify limitations or things that can help it. One of the problems, or have you found a problem with some people who come to you and they're looking for somebody, look, just tell me what to do, Matty, as opposed to, look, I'm here to help you in your journey, but the most important person in the journey, or the most important person for correcting this problem or getting this problem under control, is you, not me or the person down the street who's also working with you.
Yeah, well, and you've got to ascertain that in the beginning because, yeah, some people do need that really direct approach. And I would argue that I'm one of those people. Like, if it works, and I know it works, and you've got evidence that it works, then I should just have to do X, Y, Z to get it to work. And it comes back to just being that proactive personality. And that arguably goes back to the beginning of the story where my parents just were like, if it needs doing, just do it, you know? And my mum's a very proactive person like that too. And so, yeah, I guess maybe I was young enough to not be in the victim mindset yet, because I know going through the system for a long time, you end up just giving up, and fair enough too. Like, you go to spend so much money on doctor's appointments and health appointments and PTs and physios, and just nothing changes, and you give up and you just become a victim. You know, your life's governed by the appointments that you have that inevitably aren't going to change very much, and so there definitely are those people that are like, just tell me what to do. And they just follow the list and it's awesome. However, there's also those people that want to be those people, and they are just they're in a moment of motivation and they're like, yeah, tell me. And then you tell them, and it's the same reason it hasn't worked for the last 20 years, because motivation is fleeting. Like, you need a powerful underlying driver, like the reason you get out of bed every morning. You need to tie it to, what do you truly care about? And again, that's where arguably a coach would come in too, to tie your actions emotionally to something that you deeply care about. Whether it be, I want my kids to do well, or, I slave away all day to create enough money to feed the family. Like, and tying that, well, I need to get healthy because otherwise I can't go to work to make the money to feed the family, but so yeah, you get both people that do just need it straight up and they're action-based people, or you need to help people find a way in their own life, in the context of their experience, to become an action-based person, which isn't necessarily, super hardcore, like I'm going to do all the things, but it's like, I'm comfortable this week changing one thing and seeing how it goes. Like, that's a perfect place to start.
I know I always ask when I interview personal trainers, especially endurance coaches, do you ever interview a potential client and realize, okay, we're just not a good fit? I'm curious, as a health coach, do you ever do that? And how do you approach that with the potential client, where you just realize, okay, I know there's just something here that we're not going to work well together?
Well, for me, there's two things. So it would depend on the severity of their disease and how complicated their treatment history has been. So that's which isn't the health coach bit. That's definitely the scientist bit, sort of thing. And then I would refer them on, or I would ask, and I always ask people about how they've tried to solve the problem before. And if I can see a story that's repeating over time, I try and ascertain, am I going to be different? Like, are you going to be different with me? Like, why me? Like, why do you want to work with me? And if I feel like I'm like, oh, I don't think that this is going to work, I might suggest a psychologist, or I might suggest somebody else to be like, hang on, there's a pattern that's been repeating here, and the common denominator is you. So we need to figure out what's going on there before I can give you the nutrition information, or the weight loss information, because it will be useless until you solve that first bit. And I'm one of those people, and maybe it's the same for you. I can imagine it is, that if I have a client that's going through and not getting the results, like, I personally feel guilty. I come home, have the conversation, with other people about like, oh, what am I doing wrong? What am I doing wrong? And it often comes back to, communicating with that person in the beginning and making sure that they're appropriately supported. This is the right chapter of their health journey to be on now. But yeah, I have no issue referring anybody on, because I'm more interested in them achieving because then that would make me feel happy rather than them being with me, giving me their money and them not achieving, because I personally carry that. I'm like, I feel horrible. Like, I would be more inclined to give that person their money back and say, I've got someone, for you to see. But yeah, there's definitely people that I've said, I don't think now is the right time for us to work together. And that's totally in the interest of them doing what's right for them.
I think we're doing this recording at the opportune time. We're in the week between Christmas and New Year's. And I suspect in Australia, it's just like the US. It's New Year's resolutions are the big thing.
Yes.
And I like what you said. You said, people have to realize, and you can ascertain this through conversations with them as a health coach or, a psychologist or psychiatrist, whatever it is this the right time? And when you were saying that, I was flashing back. I mentioned Dr. Ian Dunnican that I interviewed as a sleep researcher, and some of the changes or some of the things that he was talking about at that time, I realized for me personally, I couldn't do that because I had an epileptic dog. So my sleep was going to be affected because every time she moved, I thought that there was going to be a seizure. So I'd pop up right in bed, sympathetic nervous system going crazy. And but I still remember writing these things down and saying, boy, these would be really good. And it took about a year. And unfortunately, I wish it'd been a lot longer than that. The dog passed. And it's amazing when you incorporated those things. It's kind of like when I first heard them, it's like, oh yeah, I know this will work, but it's not feasible right now. And I think in many instances, people say, and we do for my one podcast, FitLab Pittsburgh, we do movement, tip, and lifestyle hacks videos, 1-minute videos. And one of the videos we made a couple of weeks ago is, why does it have to be the new year to do a resolution or do a behavior change? The new year, if you've got family, if you've got work things, if you've got kids home from college or university, you've got all these things going on. It's like, okay, now I'm going to make a big change or a small change. Maybe that isn't the time to do it. Maybe the time to do it is when you're on vacation, when you have more time to think about it, or maybe you just were out talking with a friend and they said, I really like walking every morning. Would you meet me and walk with me? What is the mentality, do you think, where people say, okay, I want to make a change. And when you've talked to them and you realize with other things that are going on, this isn't the right time, how do you communicate with them? And what kind of a feedback have you gotten from people who've come back to work with you when you've told them this isn't the right time, come back again?
Yeah, I have no shame in being super direct, and I think that's something that is both good and bad. But I have no issue saying, look, it sounds like you're overwhelmed with things at the minute. This is just going to be another thing, and then you're going to do all of the things, terribly, and you'll achieve nothing in your life in any area. So if they seem super busy, or it's the wrong time, or they've just started a new job, or there's a primary focus that's in their life that's taking their attention, and this can't be their primary focus. All the other things are still relevant. We all have multi-dimensional lives, but and focuses, but if you're in routine, those things are on autopilot for the most part, and then you can have a primary focus. But if you've got new things going on, then maybe now's not the time. And I'll just say, when do you think would be a good time to reconnect? I'll just put a reminder in my diary. I'll message you in a month, and we'll just have another conversation. So I have no issue. And I think, I understand the New Year's resolution thing because Christmas is about, a lot of people do gifts and there's a lot of new things happening, and it's a new year, and it's all about new. So people want a new version of them. But it's something like 80% of, New Year's resolutions are forgotten about by February. So I love the concept, like everybody seems to, but it doesn't really play out in reality. So, maybe, again, waiting till for us in Australia. So now is the big summer holiday. So it's summer. I'm right now. Yesterday I spent 1 hour in the sun and forgot how white I was. And literally I'm more burnt than I ever have been in my life. Stupid move. But the point is, we're on our summer holidays right now. So maybe for people in Australia, waiting until February when the kids are back to school for the new school year, and you're back into that routine, then you can have a primary focus, And so it's the same for anybody. Wait until you can make this your primary focus, and that most of the other things in your life are sort of automated or at least routine-based, and then focus on this. Because when it's your health, and especially if you've got a chronic disease or a severe, reaction to whatever it is in your life, diet, nutrition, behavior, relationships, whatever it is, that stuff needs time and attention. And some of the people that I do push away from working with me are people that are I want to lose 20 kilos in the next 8 weeks. Like that is so that the diet culture industry has destroyed metabolisms the globe over, and particularly damaged body image, perception and stuff like that for women, like men as well, but particularly for women. And I work mainly with women. And so if I've got someone that's hardcore on the diet culture, like, nah, I've got a wedding, I need to be 30 kilos lighter in this amount of time. I'm like, I am not the person for you, because I'm interested in your longevity and your behavior long term, not contributing to a disease because we did something silly today or in the next 8 weeks. So I'm definitely, you got to have it as your primary focus. And also you need to work on building this into your lifestyle. So this just becomes another routine in your life over time. And I have a model that I call the one tweak a week. Like we just make one small tweak each week progressively towards sustainable change. Because if we're going to jump in the deep end on day one, it's not going to work. It's not sustainable. So I think people need to make sure that it's their primary focus, and not to dive in when they've got other primary focuses that require, into their attention.
And I know you mentioned this a little bit when you're talking about the traditional medical model, or, that not necessarily the individual physicians, but the idea is to get you in the system. So you're always in the system, and at least in the US, so they can collect large amounts of insurance. Somebody finds you, and I know this would vary from problem to problem. What's the typical amount of time they use you for or hire you for? Is this something, and I'm joking when I say this, it's like, oh, it's a lifetime commitment. I remember somebody being asked who was kind of on the flim flam side of the medical field, saying, how long do I need to see you? And the response was, in all seriousness, as long as you want to be well, which
that's a great response.
it's a great response for a revenue stream, but it sounds like you might have a slightly different response. So when somebody says, how long do we work together? What's the response? Because I know it varies from client to client.
Absolutely. So minimum for me would be 8 weeks, and then anything from 8 weeks up to about 6 months working with me. And that's simply because in order for us to make this normal for you, we need enough time to make the change, fall off the bandwagon a few times, get back on, like all of these things are going to happen. And we take the one tweak a week approach so that it reduces the likelihood that you'll feel the need to not do it. Like we're making so many subtle changes. And I guess it's like anything. So the most important thing I find people need is accountability. They need that accountability and support. And I think that there's this sort of dance between helping people create the healthy life like that they want, and my goal is for them to be able to do that on their own, so that in an ideal world I don't want return clients, because I know that what I've done has worked. If you didn't come back and life's good, that's amazing. But at the same time, we all need to come back and touch home base every now and then. And it's the same for me. Like, especially through 2020, my home gym it's set up amazingly now. Like, I've got this perfect routine. It's working really well. However, I know that competitive nature in me that is like, come on, you can do a bit more. It needs to go down to the gym, needs to book in a PT session from time to time to just touch base and be like, all right, here's the standard. I actually did slip a little bit because I didn't have any accountability, and it just reminds me. So yeah, anywhere from 8 weeks to 6 months is how long I work with people. And then it's just sort of touching base periodically after that. Because like for weight loss, for instance, the recidivism rate is 98%, across the world, and that's generally going to be Western medical data. But the idea is that I want to also collect that data to make sure what I'm doing doesn't follow the same terrible outcomes, So I touch base with people, but in order for them to get the result they're looking for, 8 weeks to 6 months, somewhere in there usually sits nicely for people.
And I think you hit that also. Ideally, no return visits, or rather no return customers.
Exactly.
maybe occasional checkups. Hey, can I talk to you for feeding?
Yeah, things pop up. Yeah, like if somebody's moved house and they've got a mold infestation, or they've got a new partner and they've started adding different foods into their diets, and things happen. Life happens. So occasional catch-ups I think are useful. Just like checking in with the GP once a year to just make sure that your body's still working okay, because things change. It happens.
We're talking with Matty Lansdown. One final question or quick area of topic that I always want to ask when somebody else has a podcast. You've got this going on, which very clearly sounds it's a great way to promote wellness and give people accountability. Why podcasting, and how did you get into the podcasting aspect of this?
That is a great question. So in the beginning, I realized that I was like, okay, I want to start a business because I've got this idea about how to do health and nutrition that I think will help a lot of people. And so I started, it's kind of the same way that I did my research for finding out all about the other medical modalities. And I just started researching like business coaches and how to get started. And, I'm not from a businessy family in any way. So it was all homework based. And I did just looking around, and I started the Instagram page, and I did this and I did that. And then I heard some person on YouTube say, what are your strengths? Just do that. And I was like, well, I've never been able to shut up really ever. So, and I've been a musician for a lot of my life, so I'm no stranger to the stage. I was that sort of guy that was like school captain, sports captains, like, because I was just loud, really. That was really the main reason. And so I thought, a podcast would be perfect. I get so passionate and worked up about these health topics, and I love hanging out with people, just like swimming. Love being social. It's a big social hang for me, and I get to learn in the process. So I picked a podcast because I was like, Instagram feels like a labor to me, a labor of love, but a labor. All of these things feel very laborsome for me. But if I get into a conversation, I'm in my element. So for me, podcast just made sense. I'm always sort of, shouting the latest information I've learned down somebody's, ears on a podcast. And I love that because the podcast is growing and it's being really successful. And so, yeah, it seems to be the right fit for me. But that's how I got into it. I just heard somebody say, do what you're good at. And I was like, I don't know if I'm good at it, but I definitely haven't stopped doing it.
We've been talking with Matty Lansdown. He is a health coach. He has the podcast, How to Not Get Sick and Die. Check that out. We'll have contact information for Instagram and Facebook in our show notes. Matty, once again, I had a great time when I was on your podcast. Really enjoyed your definition and explanation of what a health coach should be, which is different from what I've heard from anybody else and makes a lot more sense. So thank you very much for your time.
You are more than welcome. And thanks for hanging out, Ben. I appreciate your time. And thanks for being on my show as well. It was such a great podcast. So yeah, I'd love to do this again.
Thanks for listening to the latest episode of Moving to Live. Make sure you check out the show notes for contact information for our latest guest, as well as links about the things we talked about. Intro and exit music is Traveling Light by Jason Shaw. You can subscribe to Moving to Live wherever you find podcasts or on our website, www.moving2live.com. Please tell your friends about Moving to Live and check out our sister podcast, FitLab PGH, FITLABPGH.com, which focuses on people, businesses, events, and activities in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area that make movement a priority, because movement is a lifestyle, not just an activity. Until next time, keep on moving.